Good evening. The Anglo-Irish agreement signed this afternoon, giving the Republic a firm say in the affairs of Northern Ireland within the framework of an intergovernmental conference, has met with a stormy response from unionists. And tonight in London, a friend of the Prime Minister's, one of her closest friends, a former parliamentary private secretary, Ian Gow, who is a Minister of State at the Treasury, has resigned over what he describes as the involvement of a foreign power in a consultative role in the administration of the province. Well, earlier today, the Unionists labelled this agreement as a betrayal, and they're on the verge of resigning their Westminster seats. Jim Molyneux says it's the end of the Union as we know it. Ian Paisley claims it's rolling Irish unification. And paradoxically, Charles Hockey of Fianna Fáil views it as a sad day for Irish nationalists, a severe blow, he said, while the SDLP claim it's an advance for nationalists. We'll be hearing and debating those views shortly. We'll have reaction from Peter Archer, Labour's Northern Ireland spokesman, Shirley Williams of the SDP, and we'll be talking to the man who has a pivotal role, the Secretary of State, Tom King. But first, to the main ingredients of the package, from Forbes McFall.
The agreement signed today by Mrs Thatcher and Dr Fitzgerald shall be reviewed in 3 years' time by the two governments to see if any changes are desirable. The accord enters into force as soon as each government has notified the other of acceptance. The agreement between the two governments has 13 articles. The first article deals with the status of Northern Ireland. The governments affirm that any change in Northern Ireland's status would only come about with the consent of a majority of its people. They recognise it's the present wish of a majority for no change in Northern Ireland's status. But the governments say if a majority wishes for and formally consents to a united Ireland, they'll introduce and support legislation to this effect. The next section in the agreement concerns the Intergovernmental Conference. It says this conference is established within the framework of the existing Anglo-Irish Intergovernmental Council. The conference will be concerned with Northern Ireland and with relations between the two parts of the island of Ireland. It will deal on a regular basis with political matters, security and related matters, legal matters including the administration of justice and the promotion of cross-border cooperation. The agreement says there will be regular and frequent meetings of this conference at ministerial and official level. The joint chairman will be the Northern Ireland Secretary Tom King and a permanent Irish ministerial representative expected to be Peter Barry, the Irish Foreign Minister. Other ministers and advisers will participate and there will be a secretariat to service the conference. The agreement says that the conference will be a framework within which the two governments work together for the accommodation of the rights and identities of the two traditions in Northern Ireland. It says there will be no derogation from the sovereignty of either government. On political matters, the conference will concern itself with areas such as cultural heritage, electoral arrangements, flags and emblems, the avoidance of economic and social discrimination, the issue of a Bill of Rights for Northern Ireland. The Irish government can put forward views on the role and composition of bodies appointed by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland or his departments, bodies including the Fair Employment Agency, the Police Authority, the Police Complaints Board. The agreement makes several points about devolved government. The Irish government supports the policy of seeking devolution in Northern Ireland on a basis which secures widespread acceptance. The Intergovernmental Conference will be a framework in which the Irish government can put forward views and proposals on devolution insofar as they relate to the minority community in Northern Ireland. And should a devolved administration be established, the agreement says devolved matters would not be considered by the Intergovernmental Conference. But it says if devolution isn't possible, the Irish government may, where the minority interests are concerned, put forward views in the conference on proposals for major legislation and on major policy issues, which are within the responsibility of the Northern Ireland departments. On the question of security, the Intergovernmental Conference will have the following role. It will consider security policy, relations between the security forces and the community, and prisons policy. The conference will consider a programme of measures to make the security forces more readily accepted by the nationalist community here. On the administration of justice, the two governments say they're considering the possibility of mixed courts in both jurisdictions for the trial of certain offences. The conference will consider the harmonising of criminal law north and south and the policy aspects of extradition. On cross-border cooperation, the agreement makes the following points. The RUC Chief Constable and the Garda Commissioner are to undertake a programme of work set in hand by the Intergovernmental Conference. It will cover areas like exchange of information, liaison structures, technical cooperation, training of personnel and operation resources. The conference itself will have no operational responsibilities. On cross-border economic, social and cultural issues, the conference will be a framework for promoting cooperation between the two parts of Ireland. In a final section of the agreement, the two governments say they would support an Anglo-Irish parliamentary body if it were to be established, but it's for the parliaments in London and Dublin to make that decision.
The two premiers described the agreement as serious and solemn, recognising and formalising the rights and aspirations of both traditions, reinforcing there'd be no change in the status of Northern Ireland without the consent of the majority. The deal, they said, was aimed at defeating the men of violence and bringing peace and stability.
For a number of years
on this subject,
and therefore I can't claim it's a total surprise.
But he is claiming, is he not? He is saying exactly the same things as the Unionists, that this settlement or agreement is the involvement of a foreign power in the affairs of Northern Ireland. And that's why the Unionists have been saying today they'll have none of it. They're calling it betrayal, and they are going to shun you and your ministers at Stormont. Now, what are you going to do about that?
Well, can I just say this? I saw the demonstrations, or the films of them rather, of what took place this morning. I think it's just worth noting that all those demonstrations were being conducted by people who hadn't read a single word of the agreement.
No, but they said this
may I just say this, that they were conducting all those demonstrations, and all the shouts and allegations were by people who had not read a single word of the agreement. And all I ask of people, and it's all I can ask of people, is that before people jump to instant judgment, which has been far too big a pain and penalty that the province of Ulster has had to carry over the years, just read what that agreement contains. I believe, as somebody who believes in the Union, that it is actually a fair balance. Unionists are scared of what may happen with the Irish and the Republic of Ireland's ambitions north of the border. What this agreement finally makes clear is, in an international binding agreement, that the Republic of Ireland recognise that there will be no change in the border, that Northern Ireland will remain in its present status, and that is as part of the United Kingdom, as long as the majority so wish it. That is an undertaking that the Unionists have long sought, they've never achieved, and to get this sort of response to an agreement that recognises the position and the legitimate position of the Unionists, but at the same time recognises also the rights and the proper rights, which I hope everybody will support, but for the minority to have their view represented as well.
Yeah, but
I hope that people will look at that fairly.
Yeah, but you haven't convinced them, Mr. King. You mentioned the demonstrations which were before announcement of the agreement, but the Unionists did meet this afternoon. They were armed with the agreement. They know full well what's in that agreement, and they're saying now if they don't have a referendum from the British Parliament, they're going to resign their seats.
On condemnation of the whole Anglo-Irish agreement. Dr. Fitzgerald said that nationalists in Northern Ireland could now raise their heads high. Mr. Haughey, on the other hand, attacked the deal with ferocity. The Fianna Fáil response to the summit has come solely from Mr. Haughey. He refused to be interviewed by the BBC, but in an interview with RTE, he was forthright in his condemnation of the whole agreement.
Well, I see this as a very sad day for Irish nationalism. I think there has been a very severe blow dealt to the concept of Irish unity, and I think the position of constitutional nationalists in Ireland has been very severely undermined.
What aspects of the agreement make you say that?
Well, the first thing is, and I would have to quote the British Prime Minister here, who said very clearly and very specifically that the Unionists in Northern Ireland should take reassurance from the fact that for the first time ever, the legitimacy of their position is now enshrined in an international agreement and cannot be changed without their consent. I believe this...
But surely that has always been the position of any government that you headed, that there could be no change in the status of Northern Ireland without the consent of the majority.
No, we've never said that. We've never said that. All we've ever said, we said it time and again, is that the Unionists would have the right to agree to the forms of a new constitution for all Ireland, but we've never acknowledged the right of anybody to deny the basic concept of Irish unity.
I have to suggest to you that the agreement has been warmly welcomed by world leaders, including President Reagan, the Friends of Ireland in America, Senator Kennedy, and Seamus Mallon of the SDLP. He says the Irish government have, in fact, more than a consultative role. Now, you're disagreeing with that.
Well, I'm saying they haven't even got a consultative role, because if you look at the wording of the agreement, it says two things. First of all, the Irish government may put forward proposals and views. They may put them forward. It doesn't say that they are to be consulted about anything. And then the agreement goes on to say that every effort, a determined effort, will be made to secure or to iron out differences. That's all it says. To me, that does not amount to consultation.
Would you and your party not be concerned that the only people apparently now standing out against this agreement are Fianna Fáil, the Unionists and the Provisional IRA?
No, I wouldn't be. I'm not concerned with what view anybody else takes. It is my duty to look at the thing in a broad context, to look at it in the long term, and to try and form a mature political assessment in the light of my political objectives, which are the ultimate reunification of Ireland. And as I said, in my view, this agreement today does serious damage to that concept and puts it away into the far distant future, if ever.
So when the agreement is debated in the Dáil next week, Fianna Fáil will not support it?
Fianna Fáil will be almost certainly asking the Dáil to refuse to ratify this agreement.
And if
Prime Minister of the next government in the South, and he's a typical leader of the opposition. And as for Gerry Adams, the leader of murder gangs and murderers of my people in Northern Ireland, I wouldn't take him under my nose. What we want to get right is that English politicians are dishonest. We had a lecture from Mr. King saying, read the thing. Why didn't he read it? There is no mention in this document, and if Mr. Hume can find it, off the border of Northern Ireland as an integral part of the United Kingdom. I defy Mr. Hume to find one line about that.
John Hume.
I don't know what I'm being asked to do, but if you're asking me to discuss what emerged from the agreement today...
well, in the context
I'm asking you to show me in the agreement where it mentions, as Mrs. Thatcher said, as Gareth Fitzgerald said, that it mentions that Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom and there'll be no change in the border. This is a very carefully worded document, and we have read it thoroughly, and to say we didn't take time before we made our statement on it is an absolute lie. Everybody knows that the press were held up until we read and reread it, and we gave our definitive opinion on it. It says here, let's read what it says. It says, affirm that any change in the status of Northern Ireland would only come about with the consent of a majority of the people of Northern Ireland. It doesn't say what the status is. The status of Northern Ireland to Gareth Fitzgerald is spelt out in his constitution. The status of Northern Ireland is spelt out by Mrs. Thatcher for something else. There is no mention of the border, no mention of Northern Ireland being an integral part of the United Kingdom. And then for Shirley Williams to say, you've won something. You know,
well, John, I mean, having heard that, I mean, how is this going to work at all? I mean, you welcomed the agreement today. We have hockey in Dublin saying it's a sellout as far as nationalists are concerned. I mean, it's obvious at the moment there is little question, or seems little question, of you having some accommodation with the Unionists. So given that situation, where do we go from here?
Well, I think, first of all, that, you know, Unionist reaction is not unusual. We've heard it all before. Every single time that a British government wants to make any move, however modest, about the situation here, we get the same sort of noises. They've only one political card, it's to threaten. It's a very anti-democratic card, because they're the people who say they're loyal to the UK, not me. They're the people who are saying that that's a very qualified loyalty, because it means that they'll only accept the majority wish of the British Parliament when it suits them. What this agreement is attempting to do, and I have said that it represents an opportunity to make progress, is it sets a framework. The Unionists say they're British, the rest of the people here say they're Irish, and the proper framework for dealing with this problem, remember, all attempts at internal discussion in Northern Ireland have failed.
But
the proper framework
making is not likely to fail as a result of what we've heard.
No, because can I finish?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, because up till now, the only consent sought for any solution to this problem was the consent of 900,000 people in the northeastern corner of Ireland, for a problem which affects the peoples of both islands, all 59 million of them. This is the first time in which I believe, and my party believe, the proper framework has been set up, the British-Irish framework. And what the Unionists are saying, of course, is that they're not really British, that they don't trust the British government and Parliament, or they don't trust the democratic processes of that Parliament. They only trust it when it's doing what they wish.
Well,
now, that's their problem.
Yeah,
and
the
if they
problem
want to...
you have is Charles Hockey, I would suggest.
Well, I'm sorry, but I mean, I don't agree with what Mr. Hockey has said this evening at all. I believe that this agreement does offer an opportunity for progress. And I look at it from the point of view of someone who has grown up in Northern Ireland, and that from 1920 till 1968, not only had we the purest of nationalist doctrine preached from the south, it didn't put a slate on a single roof in the north, and throughout that period we couldn't even raise our problems or our grievances in the Westminster Parliament. And I think it's a long way from that to where we are today. It's progress, but it's only progress, and progress can only continue if people are willing to take the opportunity.
Sorry, I'd like
yes,
like
let's
to.
talk about it.
It is
I want to
only,
talk about
yeah,
the
it is
document.
only. Yes, could we let Jim Molyneux maybe take up that point? There's no progress, as I was saying, and you can perhaps tie this into your answer, unless you agree and can get into an accommodation with John Hume.
No, I think that the fact that, as Mr. Paisley said, that we took our time and deliberated and read the document very carefully, contrary to what Mr. King said, I think that provided a very useful service, because it enabled all of you gentlemen in the media, and I pay tribute to you. You analysed this document very carefully before we said anything. You came to the conclusion, and it came across all your screens and all your interviews, that this document was providing for the first time the Irish government with the right to interfere substantially in the affairs of Northern Ireland. Now, you said that, not
well,
just
that
the
was,
Unionists.
I mean, that is an element in the document, and there are many other elements.
It's a fact, and all of you were intelligent enough to identify that. Now, never mind what Mr. Paisley and I say. You're entitled to discount us if you want to. What about Ian Gow, a man who sat for 5 years at the elbow of the Prime Minister, who saw a great many of these consultative documents passing across his desk, who had his own views on what the future of Northern Ireland might be? He has now assessed this today as deadly for the Union which he supported. Now, he is not a Conservative who wears a Union Jack vest. He is a rank-and-file Conservative Member of Parliament who is disgusted by what his own Prime Minister, his very close friend, has done. So how can we be blamed for differing?
Are you determined, I want to go to John Cushion in a second, but could I just clarify this very quickly? It's unlikely, I would have thought, I mean, it's crystal ball gazing in a sense, it's unlikely that the Prime Minister will grant a referendum here in Northern Ireland. I think you would feel it's unlikely. But are you determined to go ahead and resign and have elections in Northern Ireland?
We are.
You are determined to do that.
Mr. Hume should resign if he's so confident that the people want this.
That comes back to the point I was making. Mrs. Thatcher's strong point all through the Scargill trial and the Scargill strike was, Mr. Scargill, please have a ballot. Mr. Scargill, have a ballot. She said it every day from the dispatch box. Right. Yeah. What's wrong with now Mrs. Thatcher being consistent and saying, Mr. Paisley, Mr. Molyneux, have a ballot? If she does that, we'll respond to the heart and a half.
Has it been suggested, for example, that the majority of the people of London, it's known, don't want the abolition of the Greater London Council? Is it been suggested, therefore, that the people of London should have the right to overthrow the wishes of the British Parliament in that regard? But you're challenging the whole fundamental basis of British sovereignty. That's what you're doing.
The constitutional position of this document that Mr. Hume is holding up to us tonight says there can be no change in the status of Northern Ireland without the consent of a majority of the people of Northern Ireland. The status of Northern Ireland has changed, radically changed by this document.
Well,
therefore, we should have a referendum.
Yeah, let's hear what John Cushion says about that.
And it also says in the next paragraph, recognises that the present wish of a majority of the people of Northern Ireland is for no change in the status of Northern Ireland. The point that I would make about this document is that it is a lengthy and complex document, and as such it requires detailed consideration by all in Northern Ireland and not instantaneous response. As far as my own party is concerned, we will evaluate the proposals in this document. If we consider that they are proposals for progress, it will have our support. If the role that it's conceding to the Republic is primarily and exclusively a consultative role, it will have our support. If it is moving down the road of joint authority, we will oppose it. If some of the proposals coming out of it were indeed for mixed courts, we would oppose it. But if it is trying to formalise an existing arrangement which can contribute towards political progress, I think there's an incumbent responsibility on all of us to look to see if that cooperation can be structured, and structured in a way that ensures that the poor young policeman who was murdered so callously on the border today is not followed by others. And one of the positive benefits, not least of all for unionists in this sort of thing, and I'm not giving this document a blank check at this stage, one of the positive benefits for unionism is security cooperation. And we heard today a commitment from the Taoiseach of the Republic of Ireland that they would put before the Dáil a decision on the question of the international agreement on terrorism, and that would be a significant step forward.
Let's discuss the problem.
Sorry, I'll come to you in a second. I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you in a second. John Hume, I think, wanted to respond to
Let's
something.
discuss the problem that this document is supposed to be addressing. What is the problem? It's a problem of divided loyalties, right? There's divided loyalties in this community, and from the clash of those loyalties comes the instability that is disfiguring the entire community. What the two Prime Ministers say they're trying to do is, first of all, and no more than this, by the way, create equality of treatment and recognition to both loyalties. Now, do these gentlemen agree or disagree with that objective? Because I believe what they are really objecting to is any form of equality of treatment as they have done in the past.
That's absolute nonsense.
And if they accept that there should be equality of treatment of both identities, how would they do it? Because I believe it's only on that basis that we can then begin to break down the barriers between us of prejudice, which are real and which are there and which disfigure us, and which anybody who seriously wants peace and stability for all our people must address.
Well,
what this document does is offer the opportunity of a framework in which to do that. No more, no less.
Why can't you seize that?
Listen, let me tell you this. John Hume hasn't even the document before him. Now, I have read and reread and parsed and looked at this document.
That's right.
And for Mr. Cushnan to come in here and try to tell the people of Northern Ireland it's offering only a consultative role is entirely misleading. Let me read one extract. With a view to enhancing cross-border cooperation on security matters, the conference shall set in hand a programme of work to be undertaken by the Chief Constable of the Royal Ulster Constabulary. And this is going to include such things as the training of personnel and operational resources. Now, that's nothing to do with consultation. That is something that is going to make the RUC part of a partly controlled
But if it improves
by the
security and
Republic of
saved
Ireland.
lives, would you not be in
Well,
favour
it's a
of it?
very strange thing that the military chiefs of the British Army said to Margaret Thatcher, there is no result coming from your agreement with the South that is going to give you better security on the border. We challenged her with that, and she had to admit that that was right.
Jim,
let's be honest.
Now, Jim Mullen, you're going to have
your
to
solution,
face... Sorry,
gentlemen?
sorry,
You know,
but you're going to have to face
I'm
perhaps...
unique here. I'm being squeezed out.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to get you in at this point. Because it does strike me that you may, as unionists, be faced very, very soon, and we were discussing it with the other Westminster politicians, with the sovereign Parliament at Westminster saying, yes, this agreement we accept, and that is going to be the law of the land. Now, you have got to decide what you're going to do at that point.
Yes,
what are you going to do?
We will remind them that they have said repeatedly that any arrangement in Northern Ireland must have widespread cross-community consent. And we will then proceed to ask them, does this document have widespread consent in the community? If it did, why did it require 1,000 policemen to guard the participants in that conference today at Hillsborough? If it was such a great bonanza for the people of Northern Ireland, why did they have to fly in and out like helicopters? Why couldn't they face the people of Northern Ireland? And why can't they have a ballot? I come back to that demand of Mrs. Thatcher's. And special legislation introduced to subsidise at the taxpayer's expense trade unions to have ballots on all sorts of issues. Why can't you have a ballot on
but
this
at the end of the day, you're still going to have to decide what you're going to do if the sovereign Parliament says, look, Mr. Molyneux and Ian Paisley, that's the way it is.
Well, the one thing you can be sure of, that we will not be quizzlings, we will not crawl out from under stones to work with a joint authority, and you don't just have Ian Paisley's judgment and mine, you have Ian Gow, a senior Treasury Minister, saying that I will not be a member of a government which has betrayed the people of Northern Ireland and has conceded against all their promises. Yes, he said, conceded joint
fundamental basis. All I can say tonight to the people of Northern Ireland, they will make their decision on this. And for Margaret Thatcher to raise the dead, as she did at the conference, and say, we owe it to those that have given their lives to give this document a chance. Those people laid down their lives that there should be no interference with Dublin. The object of the IRA is fulfilled in this document. They want a united Ireland, and this is a road to a united Ireland.
if there is to be progress in this community, it's got to be on the basis of legitimate recognition of the aspirations and rights of the unionist and nationalist traditions in Northern Ireland. Now, these proposals today are to a large extent addressed to the nationalist community. Now, the one thing I do understand is the great unease right throughout the entire unionist community tonight. And if this document is to be a runner, the one thing that it's going to depend upon is the reaction of nationalists. And the one thing I'd like to put to John Hume, given that unease, what are the reciprocal gestures from constitutional nationalist leaders? Are they now going to support the police? And equally importantly, are they now going to come back into political dialogue within Northern Ireland itself? Because I believe there needs to be a positive response on those issues if many of the fears that exist in the Protestant community tonight are going to be eased.
All right, two very simple and straightforward questions. Will you now say, I support the police, will you go back into the local process?
First of all, I don't think that we have to give anything to anybody for being treated as equals in a society. That's a right. It's not a concession. That's number one. Let me finish. Number two, Mr. Cushnahan puts the point about supporting the police. The SDLP's position on policing has never changed. We've said consistently that we fully support the police in impartially seeking out anybody who commits a crime in this community. Unlike the gentlemen on my right and left here who support them when it suits them, as the summer showed, their law and their order, we have said that the sort of support that is required must be based, and law and order in every democratic society in the world is based on political consensus. My hope is that this agreement and the framework that it sets up will develop the atmosphere in which that political consensus can develop. He asked me, will I engage in... We never left Northern Ireland politics, by the way.
Join the police,
and people who read this agreement today should understand that the SDLP have never left Northern Ireland politics, because we are the ones, and we've been very honest about it. We told you that we didn't think that you would get agreement inside Northern Ireland, and you didn't, and you couldn't, and we told you that we were going on to set up and to try to set up a British-Irish framework, and we followed that through. And against the background of this agreement, we're quite willing to enter into discussions with you and about the sharing of responsibility for administration in Northern Ireland on the basis of sharing the responsibility at executive level. And will you talk to us about that?
Mr. Hume knows perfectly well that the British government that he's blowing about and shouting about and saying it's a wonderful government and telling us we have got to obey it. Now, why does he not obey the British government in the sense they set up an assembly? They said that assembly was for all the people elected to it to come round a table and discuss the future government of Northern Ireland. Mr. Hume's policy is Northern Ireland is a failed entity. It cannot exist.
Briefly.
And under this here, that thesis is copper fastened. There will never be devolved government of any kind because the SDLP has now not only the other veto, but now they have the veto of this agreement.
You didn't get round. You were asked a question, I think, by John Cushnan earlier. Would you advise your people to join the police? We didn't get an answer to that.
You've got a very clear answer to that, and you've also got...
Hold on a minute.
Hold on a minute.
They're not going to join.
Can I answer the question? These two gentlemen here are the people who say they're loyal. They're the British loyalists here. The essence of British democracy and British law and order is the sovereignty of Parliament. No more, no less. That's the fundamental principle. They are the people who twice in this century have undermined that principle in the creation of Northern Ireland in 74. And they are the people who are standing out against the whole basis of order in this society. I am saying and repeating again and again, unlike these gentlemen, I fully support and unequivocally support the police force in impartially seeking out anybody who commits a crime in this society. That's a stronger and more honest position than those who only support them when they are doing their will, as imported down in the summertime. And in terms of joining the police force and giving the police force the sort of support that is required, that is not a matter of political policy, that is a matter of fact. That happens when there is political consensus, when people feel part of... Let me finish. When people feel part of the society in which they're living. And my hope, and it's no more than a hope, for this agreement is that it will create the atmosphere in which that consensus will develop.
But is there nothing at all, Jim Molyneux, is there nothing at all? I mean, are you writing this agreement off this framework? Is there nothing in it you could grasp from John Hume that would give people out there some hope that you could work together?
I'm saying that it's with great sadness that I view this document, given that Ian Gow, an impartial judge of the matter, has said that this is a device to take Northern Ireland out of the United Kingdom. That very fact is going to drive the two communities apart. It would make it utterly impossible to do what we invited John Hume to do over a year ago. He preferred to go and talk to the IRA rather than his fellow elected representatives.
Just a brief final comment
to you people.
Yeah.
My final comment is that I am very glad that I can recommend tonight the people of Northern Ireland to read this document. And when they read it, they will not need Jim Molyneux, nor Ian Paisley, nor any loyalist to make any comment on it. This document is blatant nationalism, it's blatant republicanism, it's for a takeover of Northern Ireland. And that's what it's all about. And to say it's consultative is absolutely a falsehood, because it's going to give real powers to this conference to do these things that are part of a machinery to bring us into a united Ireland.
John Cushing.
My party is prepared to give this document the consideration to which it's entitled. After evaluating it completely and monitoring it and assessing whether it will contribute to progress, we will make an adjudication. And I would hope that there will be proper discussion and responsible discussion between all the elected parties in Northern Ireland on the basis of it.
Well, why not come
Just
to this?
the last, would you fight one of the seats in the election? I was just thinking mid-Ulster, would you fight there if there was an election?
I'm looking forward to seeing whether these gentlemen will resign their Westminster seats or not, and whether they will resign their Assembly seats. I'm looking forward to that. But let me repeat, there are two loyalties in this community. I recognise their loyalty. Do they recognise mine? And do they recognise that both must be treated equally, and that is the basis of a way forward, and that is the basis of dialogue?
Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in this evening. Well, these matters will be further debated in the Assembly tomorrow, minus, of course, John Hume. It will also come up in the House of Commons on Monday. Well, that's it. It's been described as a historic day, whatever your view it has been. Good night.